Hello everyone. It has been a bit since I made a video. Technically it's only been a few weeks, but that's beside the point since I've actually recorded one. But now it's time to do my final video discussing race/ethnicity in North American Big Brother. And today I'm going to talk about the Indigenous and Latino house guests in Big Brother Canada. I was initially going to do this as two different videos, but I didn't have enough information. And with a lot of Latin America being a mixture of European and Indigenous, anyways, I just thought it makes sense to put the two together, but to discuss each group separately within the video. So, I'm going to first talk about the Indigenous house guests in Big Brother Canada, and I have to say that I'm really impressed that Canada actually went out of their way to cast a decent amount of Indigenous people, since in Big Brother USA history, out of 23 years technically, 22 seasons, not even including the spin offs, and over like 300, maybe even over 400 house guests, they have not cast an Indigenous house guest. And with the problems of the lack of visibility that Indigenous people have in North America in general, that is a huge problem. So I'm glad that Big Brother Canada has tried to rectify it. So the first person we are going to discuss is Suzette from Big Brother Canada 1. I remember her talking a lot about her heritage and her being Indigenous quite a bit, especially since there was a lack of representation in the media overall, and I liked hearing her perspective on this and to see how she navigated it throughout the house with her experience of being on a nationally syndicated television show and the pressures of representing an underrepresented group of people. In the actual show, she was portrayed as paranoid and crazy a lot throughout her time in the house, and she had moments where she called Tom a redneck, and she got a lot of flack for that, as well as her freak out on Enil, which seemed very random. Maybe she felt some racial tension within the house, but I can't say that's what she experienced since she didn't experience it. But for her to call Tom a redneck, that had to have come from somewhere. So it was very hard for her to fit in with the cast during the season, though it could partially be due to her age as well, as she was a lot older than the other house guests, and she was one of the few who were parents too. Like I've said in the past, it is a lot harder for older women of color, especially if they are mothers, to fit in compared to their male or Caucasian counterparts. We are going to move on to Anick, and there really isn't much to discuss pertaining her. Since she was booted first, she was not on feeds, and as we all know by now, week 1 of Big Brother Canada is always merged into 2 episodes, and the first episode is always just the generic introduction, so the first week is usually squeezed into 1 episode. So the information that we have on her and her journey is extremely limited. Despite that, Anick was portrayed as very kooky/artistic/weird, which might have tied into her heritage and ethnicity/race, and her personality ultimately caused her to be outcasted and booted first. So we go quite a few years without an Indigenous house guest being on the show, and the next person is Damien from Big Brother Canada 7. So I think he got the same edit as the likes of Kiefer as the quote-unquote glowing non-black minority male edit, where they get to talk about their heritage/ethnicity/race a lot, and were portrayed as saints in this element, especially compared to some of the others in the house, editorially wise. It was also very easy for him to adapt in the house, and no one really made any reference to his race, so that was good for him. Of course, when it comes to the strategic and social elements of the game, he did little to nothing. So, we're just going to move on. We move on to seasons where we have Kiefer from Big Brother Canada 9, who is placed on the cast. I remember him getting a lot of praise and positivity in his portrayal on the show, to the chagrin and complaint of some fans who didn't like him, And they gave him a lot of time to speak about his ethnicity / race / heritage several times throughout the season, to the point that he sometimes felt a lot of pressure for being put in this quote-unquote spokesperson position. I believe he also won Canada's favorite house guest for this reason as well. Kiefer was an interesting character, and we saw his highs and lows strategically, socially, and personality-wise. I've noticed that so far, the men get to speak about their heritage and race, and it's portrayed a lot more positively compared to the women in the show. If I remember correctly, he is actually biracial with Indigenous and white. But his mixed race didn't come into play during the house at all. So we move on to the current season, which is Big Brother Canada 10, and we have two people to talk about. And of course, I'm going to talk about Jay first. I already spoke about him before, and he spoke more about his Indigenous race during his short stay in the house, and I get that, since Indigenous house guests are a lot more underrepresented than Black house guests. There was a great ritual that he did with the house guests, which involved feathers and sage, and he explained the importance of that, as well as the ritual overall. It was a very nice moment that we got to see, and it taught us a lot as well. And the final person on this list is Josh from the same season of Big Brother Canada 10. Like Jay from his season, it seemed like production and or the network wanted to kill two birds with one stone, so he also fit as being biracial with Black and Indigenous. This caused a lot of anger among some of the fans because they felt like Black people were overrepresented, and I noticed that with the fans, whenever someone is mixed with Black, they just automatically group them in with Black instead of acknowledging their other ethnicity or race. So, like Jay, he spoke a lot more about his Indigenous side and heritage and race, and I understand why he did that, because they are a much more underrepresented group in media overall, and I believe his mother is Indigenous, and that's who he was primarily raised by. Now looking at it, this could be why a lot of the Black house guests eventually felt bitter towards him as the game went by, and they were sent to jury, to the point that none of them voted for him to win, despite him mentioning him being a minority in many different ways, since they came to realize that they thought they were closer to him than he really felt towards them. So that's my quick little synopsis over the Indigenous house guests that have been cast on the show throughout their 10 seasons. And it's really sad that they've done a lot better in this with a lot less time and a lot less seasons than the United States. I noticed that Indigenous men tend to have it a lot better in the Big Brother Canada house compared to the Indigenous women, and they tend to cast more Indigenous men over women as well, so that's an area that they could improve on for future seasons. And now it is time to move on to the Latino house guests. So, as I was discussing the ethnic / racial groups in Big Brother US, I mentioned that they cast a lot more Latinos than any other ethnic or racial groups outside of Black people, and it was really a group of people that US liked to focus on, especially in the more recent years, even in the earlier seasons as well, now that I'm thinking about it. I'm mentioning that because Big Brother Canada really has not prioritized Latino house guests, as they have cast a lot more from the Middle East / North Africa, as well as South Asia, in comparison, so there aren't many Latino house guests to talk about here. So the first one in my recollection is Pilar from Big Brother Canada 3. I do think that her being of Latin descent might have had her struggling to communicate with her cast in the same way that it did for Indy in this most recent season of BBUS struggled to communicate, since I believe English is her second language. In general, there really isn't anything else to talk about. She wasn't cast to be a Latin stereotype and fit in pretty well with her cast, so her ethnicity wasn't a factor. I don't know if this was due to her being white passing or it just wasn't a factor at all. So the next person we are going to discuss is Raul from Big Brother Canada 4. He was clearly cast to be a Latin stereotype, which is the spicy, fiery Latino person, since he had nothing to offer game-wise or anything else. And I've mentioned in BBUS that they've done this over there a few times as well. Pretty much casting someone where their race or ethnicity would be their personality trait. In a way, I felt like he lived up to that, since he did have his quote-unquote spicy moments, but with him being so under-edited, it showed to me that he didn't deliver as much as they, meaning production and the network, were expecting him to. English was his thinking language as well, I believe, and I do believe that there was a communication barrier for him and the other house guests as well. So we are going to move on to seasons to discuss Alejandra. So she was another example of Big Brother Canada and Big Brother North America in general, actually, casting someone who is a Latino person with the intention of putting them in the slot where they're hoping for the house guest to be fiery and spicy, almost in a way to indicate that their ethnicity is their personality trait. Alejandra did have her moment or two where she was angry and lashed out. She was relatively calm, and while she was not as strategic as the edit wanted to paint her out to be, you can clearly tell that production liked her strong personality. I remember a lot of the house guests being intimidated and scared by her, and they would always talk about her huge personality and made her into a more smarter, cunning person than she really was. I'm wondering if this was the case because there wasn't a black woman on her season, so they just kind of directed that all to Alejandra. And I mentioned this happening to Yvette in Big Brother 6, and it's interesting because neither one of them are white passing, so maybe that's something that we can delve into at a future time. And the final person I'm going to discuss is Estefania from Big Brother Canada 7. I really don't have much to talk about here. She fit in pretty well in the season, and there's nothing pertaining to her ethnicity that stood out to me that could have affected her journey throughout the season. Like I mentioned with Kiara, I think her being a woman negatively deterred her throughout the season, instead of anything pertaining to her race or ethnicity. Yeah, so they clearly haven't cast many Latino people in Big Brother Canada, and it's an interesting contrast compared to Big Brother US. But even with the small sample size that we do have, you can clearly tell that the production and the network has some issues there because they want some of their ethnicity or race to be the personality traits so they can be quote unquote spicy or bold, which is problematic to say the least. Hopefully they cast more Latino people in the future and they don't let their ethnicity be a personality trait of theirs, which Big Brother US tends to be guilty of as well. So that is going to conclude this little series that I've done about how race/ethnicity affects each people in these racial or ethnic groups in Big Brother US and Big Brother Canada. I'm most likely going to make a playlist so all these videos will be easily to find together. Thank you all for following me on this journey, and I'll be back with something soon.